This poem is called Gabriel's Annunciation, and it's by Richardson. For a moment, I hesitated on the threshold. For the space of a breath, I paused, unwilling to disturb her last ordinary moment, knowing that the next step would cleave her life, that this day would slice her story in two, dividing all the days before from all the ones to come. The artists would later depict the scene, Mary dazzled by the Archangel, her head bowed in humble assent, awed by the messenger, who consented to leave paradise to bestow such an honor upon a woman, a mortal. Yet I tell you, it was I who was dazzled, I who found myself agape when I came upon her, reading at the loom in the kitchen. I cannot now recall, only that the woman before me, blessed and full of grace long before I called her so, she shimmered with how completely she inhabited herself, inhabited the space around her, inhabited the moment that hung between us. I wanted to save her from what I'd been sent to say. Yet when the time came, when I had stammered the invitation, history would not recall the sweat on my brow, the pounding of my heart, would not note that I said, "Do not be afraid," as much to myself as to her. It was she who saved me, her first deliverance, her let it be, not just a declaration to the divine, but a word of solace, of soothing, of benediction. For the angel in the doorway who would hesitate one last time, just for the space of a breath torn from his chest, before wrenching himself away from her radiant consent, her beautiful and awful yes. That was by Richardson. It's called Gabriel's Annunciation. There's another poet called Denise Levertov who also has a wonderful poem about the same encounter between the Archangel Gabriel and the young woman Mary. If you invite me back next Advent, I'll read Denise's version because it's also very good. Denise draws our attention to that same pause, that hesitation on the part of Gabriel. She writes, God waited. She was free to accept or to refuse. Choice, integral to humanness. God waited. Mary was free to accept or to refuse. Choice, integral to humanness. So when we think about the Christmas story, like this story of the Archangel and Mary, it's usually something that happened to other people long, long ago. That's what all the carols tell us, don't they? But the poets that we just heard and the mystics tell us a very different story. Meister Eckhart, a German wonderful mystic who was born in 1260, quite a long time ago, he wrote, "What good is it to me if Mary gave birth to the Son of God all those years ago, and I do not give birth to the Son of God in my own person, time, and culture? We are all meant to be mothers of God." A contemporary mystic, wonderful Franciscan sister called Ilia Delio. Have you heard of her? She's an environmentalist. She's a bit of a genius. She talks about quantum physics a lot. You have to listen hard when you listen to Ilia. She says this about Advent. I'm going to read out quite a long chunk. She says, "I don't think we have a good sense of what Advent is about. We are the ones asleep in the manger, not Jesus." She says the word Advent comes from Latin adventus, meaning arrival. It's a preparation for the coming of Christ. But what do we mean by that? If God has already come, what are we waiting for? You know, if God has already become incarnate in Jesus, what are we waiting for? That Advent, that waiting, that arrival of what's coming to us from the future is actually a call to awaken to what is already in our midst. This is still Ilia Delio. I think Advent is a coming to a new consciousness of God already loving us into something new. Let me repeat that. I think Advent is the coming into a new consciousness of God already loving us into something new, something more whole. We are not to be waiting for something that's not there. Rather, we are to attend to what is already here. I agree with her, because if we see the birth of Christ as a historical spiritual event, we are confronted with a huge problem. Why, 2,000 years later, has Christ's kingdom not come on earth? Why are there wars? Why is the gap between the rich and poor growing? Why do homeless people in our community die in their tents? These are the painful questions that haunt us. They haunt us because they show how far we have fallen from grace. So I take great solace in Ilia Delio's assurance that God is already here and moving towards us. How do we receive this? How do we wake up as a collective human soul? How do we wake up from the manger? Mary, that we heard about, and we heard her prophecy, it's called the Magnificat, more on that in a minute. Mary is such a helpful teacher for us. She shows how revolution and creative lasting change happens one human being at a time. The young woman, Mary, or Miriam, that would have been her Jewish name, is full of sovereignty and compassion. And I wish that Protestant Christianity would talk more about Mary, because she is the doorway into a bigger, kinder consciousness. Advent for me is all about Mary, which is why I kindly asked you, no, you kindly offered, I asked boldly to change the candles around. There is space for me in this church here. Thank you. Mary is so central to Advent for me because she teaches and models that God really is among us. If there's no Mary, there is no Christ. It's as simple as that. Now, I didn't get the importance of Mary until my friend Christine started working on this book. This is called Birthing the Holy, Wisdom from Mary to Nurture Creativity and Renewal. Now, my friend Christine is a poet and a spiritual director, a wonderful teacher. She's the abbess of Abbey of the Arts. Have you come across her before? Well, a lot of my folks online know all about Christine. Whenever she creates a book, she collaborates with a whole plethora of artists, visual artists, dancers, filmmakers, and musicians. And luckily, she asked me to help her with 3 of the representations of Mary in this book. There's 31 of them. But she asked me to do music for Mary as Virgin, Mary as Mother of Sorrows, and Mary as the mirror of justice. And that's what today is all about. How Mary is, I talk about that prophecy that she makes, that coming, that quickening of the holy. After she says yes to the angel, it's called the Magnificat. It means to magnify. I talk about that as Christianity in miniature. And I didn't really get that that I needed to open my heart more deeply so that the Christian idea could come through my life. I didn't really get that until I jumped into this project with Christine. So I'm going to read a little bit about this for you. The historical context of Mary's situation makes it clear that she was vulnerable and living on the margins. Theologian Elizabeth Schuller Florenza writes, "In the center of the Christian story stands not the lovely white lady of artistic and popular imagination, kneeling in adoration before her son. Rather, it is a young pregnant woman living in occupied territory and struggling against victimization and survival and dignity. This is Mary who understands the needs for justice in a world where so many live lives of desperation and violence. Her song is an echo of the ancient call of the Hebrew Scriptures to honor the orphan and the widow. It's all about caring for the oppressed. Jesus was Jewish. This idea that he brought into strong manifestation already strongly exists and existed. And Mary is central to how to say yes to this. So the Magnificat that we heard, that was Luke, it's so important. The monastics say it every day in Vespers, the evening service. They say the Magnificat, they sing it every day. Magnificat means to magnify, and it sings of how we can magnify the divine light in us, how we can make space for holiness to grow if we make space within our ego and within our heart. But it also talks about how we can magnify the light for others. It's a prophecy, and it's beautiful. And I was asked to set it in song, and after I did that, I started praying with Mary all the time. More on that. Here's the song first. My soul shall praise and magnify you, Lord. Yes, I have come. Yes, I will come. I hear your voice is calling out my name. Into my life you shall be born. All generations praise to hold with me the sacred heart, my beating heart. And my soul is placed into this fire of love. Yes, it becomes God's will be done. The proud cannot hear beyond their words, their thoughts enclosed, so stale and old. The rich cannot receive what they don't own. This emptiness, the spaciousness. All generations praise to hold with me the sacred heart, my beating heart. And my soul is placed into this fire of love. Yes, it becomes God's will be done. Spread out the feast, let those in hunger come. Your face be shown, your love made known. The humble hear your voice, with you they sing. Magnificat, Magnificat. All generations praise to hold with me the sacred heart, my beating heart. And my soul is placed into this fire of love. Yes, it becomes God's will be done. Reach out to touch the world that is to come. Magnificat, Magnificat, magnify. Magnificat, Magnificat, Magnificat. Magnificat. So writing the Magnificat and putting Mary's yes into my yes, which I have to say was quite a frightening commission to say yes to, but I couldn't say no to Mary's yes. Because for me, this Magnificat, this passage of Luke, is one of the most important pieces of scripture that's ever been handed down to us. And it taught me that I can't access the depth of heart required for Christianity without Mary's example and her presence in prayer. I often pray to Mary, which is a beautiful thing. There's something about her as a representation of the heart of all mothers and the heart of the cosmos. And I find that praying with and to her helps me keep my heart open and keep looking with compassion when I actually feel overwhelmed and want to look away. We are flooded with bad news. It's very difficult to stay open and awake to that and not become numb. Mary is very helpful. She never looks away. She doesn't leave at the end. In the Easter story, she's right there with her son until he dies. And, maybe even more difficult, she carries on afterwards and keeps living. So when I notice that my heart is overwhelmed, I turn to Mary to help me keep my heart open and respond with love and prayer for the people in the situations and not just get distressed by the state of humanity. Mary also reminds me that God loves all people. And now we know this, we're taught this, but we forget it so quickly. I'm going to give you a very strange example of how I pray with Mary. You're going to get a little inside look to the weirdness of my prayer life. One time I was participating in Zoom worship. I'm often online for Zoom or leading worship on Zoom. And I was sitting in my living room, and it was 2 years ago. My friend Christine, who wrote this book, was leading the worship at this moment in time. And she was getting us to imagine talking to Mary in a guided meditation. So here I am with my eyes closed, imagining Mary in my living room. At exactly that moment, in the outside world, I hear a truck thundering towards my house. Now this is really unusual because I live on a dead-end road. Really noisy truck. So I open one little eye. I've got one eye in my prayer and the other one looks out the window. And I see one of those freedom trucks driving up the hill at like 40 miles an hour towards my house. You know, with the 2 flags on the back. And I'm like, I get frightened when I see those trucks, right? They scare me as a transgender person. I think a lot of people who are minorities get frightened when they see something that represents racism and bigotry and hate of gay people. So here I am, trying to pray, stay focused, wondering what on earth is going on because I live on a dead-end road. And all of a sudden, in my prayer life, Mary jumps out of my prayer and into the passenger seat of the truck. So immediately I open my eyes, I look, the truck is right there, like the equivalent of how far away you are from me, and I see this young man with red hair driving the truck. And I go from being frightened of this man to wondering who he is and why Mary loves him so much. All this happens in a flash second. This is a view into my inner prayer life. And I remember thinking, wow, I wonder who that young man is. Now, a few weeks later, I got to meet the young man with the red hair, because the reason he was there, he was working for my neighbor, cutting down some trees. And he wanted to make sure that he didn't cut down any trees on my property. And I was so delighted to get to meet him, because I was fascinated about who he was. Mary completely changed it in an instant from my sense of security and fear to everybody is a child of God. Not just the idea, but this outpouring of that. I love that about Mary. So she has the wisdom and compassion not to shut down or compartmentalize and look away. I look to her when I notice myself being judgy or emotionally get overwhelmed. So returning to Meister Eckhart, these words from 700 years ago. What good is it to me if Mary gave birth to the Son of God all those years ago, if I do not give birth to the Son of God in my own person, time, and culture? We are all meant to be mothers of God. The mother in us reaches out to touch the world with compassion. The mother in us does not abandon her biting, screaming children. The mother in us gives of herself so that others may have life abundantly. This is my body, broken open for you. If childbirth, with its pain and blood and incredible gift of new life, isn't an everyday example of the bread and wine, I don't know what is. But Mary in the Nativity story isn't just described as mother, she's also described as virgin. And here's a word that most people I meet stumble over rather than take inspiration from, which is a pity, because Mary as virgin has a great deal to teach us about our own capacity for holiness and transformation. Here's what Christine has to say. Devotion to Mary as virgin means being drawn to the power she contains within herself and radiates out generously to the world. We are drawn to her because she is a mindful, loving presence who reflects this gift of her presence back to us. She empowers us to find this independence of purpose and autonomy within ourselves. Theologian Katharina Hawks describes virginity as an attitude of being open and available to the divine mystery, to the voice and power of the Spirit in us. In this way, we learn from Mary to live from our center, our own roots, in independence and not in a one-sided, alienating dependence. To identify with the virgin archetype means to know our own intrinsic worth and power. I think of it as representing the holiness that is whole unto ourselves. That, God needs us to show up as us. What do they say? Be yourself, everybody else's place is taken. It's really true. Choice, integral to humanness. Mary chooses, thy will be done. And those small yeses or ethical no's, sometimes the Holy tells us to say no. But those ethical, God-directed choices ripple out. And it's not Christ outside us that will change the world. It's Christ in our own sphere of influence, in our prayers, in our world. This is what will bring the change that we are longing and praying for. Advent calls us to make space within ourselves for the sacred to have its way with us unimpeded. That's what we're here for. Advent calls us to make space within ourselves for the sacred to have its own way with us unimpeded. And this is what Christianity, and I would say all other religious traditions, teach us. To transform the ego and our lifestyles from that of being master of my world to that of being a willing helper of the divine, yielding one choice at a time. Please remember, when we're thinking about Mary, that one person, one life, can make all the difference in the whole world. And we are the light of the world. I'm going to close with this blessing on Mary as the mirror of justice. Holy Mary, mirror of justice, you reflect back to us what is possible in a world of corruption and suffering. You hold the vision of a new creation. Your very being magnifies the divine and reveals a pathway of justice where each person and being is well nourished and loved, where everyone has more than enough and abundance for flourishing, where each one is cherished for exactly who they are. You call on us to care for those who dwell on the edges, to bring them to the center of our concern. You empower us to resist violence in all its forms and to shower this world with care and kindness. Help us transform this world with love, compassion, and justice. Sounds a lot like Christianity to me. Thank you for listening.